And welcome to At Issue. I'm H. Wayne Wilson. In the aftermath of Ferguson, Missouri, New York City, and we could probably list other incidents across the country, we have to discuss how do the police and the community come to grips with these situations. And to have that conversation, I've asked three people to join me so that you can also continue the conversation at home with a better insight. And that conversation will come from Jamila Wilson. Jamila is a Peoria citizen, but she is a citizen who is actively involved in the community. So we thank you for your participation in various aspects of the discussion. John Elliott is here. John is with MAP. MAP stands for Minority and Police Partnership in Bloomington-Normal, and he is also the second vice president for the Bloomington-Normal NAACP. And also joining us is Mike Matejka. Mike is with Not in Our Town over in Bloomington-Normal. Many of you will know Mike from his days on the city council, and also he's with the Laborers International, so you may know him in that regard, but for today's purposes, Not in Our Town is the discussion point. And let's start the conversation there. For those that don't know, Not in Our Town, what is it? When did it start? How did it come about?
Okay. Not in Our Town grew out of an incident in Billings, Montana in 1993, where there was a white supremacist group that began attacking African Americans, Native Americans, and Jewish families in Billings. And the community kind of came together and rallied and said, not in our town. We're not going to accept this kind of hatefulness. And so a half-hour television show called Not in Our Town was produced to tell the story. I happen to know the producer, so we got a pre-screening copy and held some community forums in Bloomington-Normal and just showed the film just to get some dialogue and discussion going, and it kind of blossomed from there. The city began to use it for training with city officials, with police department. We held with some of our other folks, some of the churches in our town, a Not in Our Town march in 1995. And in a sense, this half-hour television show, we took it on and kind of adopted it, and it kind of spread across the country from there with other communities picking it up. So for 20 years, when there have been incidents, and more when there haven't been incidents, to try to use it, what we like as inoculation. How do we get people aware that we have to monitor our community, monitor our own behaviors, and kind of set a standard that we're going to be as fair and equal and non-discriminatory and embracing of all our citizens and our friends and neighbors.
So Bloomington-Normal actually is the first community in America to have a Not in Our Town chapter?
Yeah, I mean, it was the group that produced the film was just going to do a half-hour TV show, and now they've kind of become a national Not in Our Town office, and they credit Bloomington-Normal as the one that kind of carried it on, and then that spurred other communities to do it too.
And by the way, that was a PBS aired program back in 1995 was when it actually went on air.
Right.
John, the origins of MAP, how did that come to be?
Well, there was a big forum that we had at ISU dealing with racial profiling. We brought in some national figures to speak. And after that forum, we decided to talk locally with our local law enforcement to talk about racial profiling. And the dialogue between the NAACP and the Bloomington Police Department created such a big event and everything that we wanted to continue the dialogue. So then we brought in Normal Police, we brought in the Sheriff's Department, the state police, and then the state attorney's office there, so we could continue just talking about law enforcement and relationships in the community. So it just expanded from racial profiling to just talking about police relationships with the minority community.
And speaking of relationships, and the newly formed Peoria Police Community Relations Advisory Committee, just getting its feet wet, so to speak. You're not on that committee, but you seem to be a regular at those meetings. What's your take on the role of that committee and how it's doing so far?
Well, it's great that we have an advisory committee, a community relations advisory committee in place here. Understanding a little bit about the origins of how it came to be in 2010, the NAACP here in Peoria chapter, we were receiving lots of complaints from young African American, Latino men particularly, of being harassed by Peoria Police. And so the NAACP filed a formal complaint with the Department of Justice to address these issues, and out of that complaint came the establishment of this advisory committee. So it's in its first 18 months. They've been meeting and having retreats, and on November 25th, the day after the announcement of Darren Wilson's non-indictment, we were able to host through the Peoria Community Relations Advisory Committee a forum to talk about what and how Peoria was interpreting and understanding what is going on. And what came out of that forum was kind of a groundswell of people from the community saying, we are experiencing this same type of harassment. So there's a great need for.
So how prevalent is harassment? Or maybe we use a broader term. Maybe it's not just harassment, but sometimes we just see that the community and the police are at odds with one another. And let me quote a number for you before you respond, because Chief Hefner in Bloomington said that there were 73,000 police officer contacts with citizens of all types, from January 1st to December 9 last year. Of those 79,000, there were 24 complaints. So that seems like a relatively low number.
Right.
Do you think that's representative?
Well, I think what happens, so many people feel reluctant to just speak up or file a complaint or to talk about it publicly, because they feel like they'll be retaliated against, or there'll be some type of retribution against them. And so I think what the police department has to do is to make people feel comfortable when they do come forward to say something, because I don't think people feel at ease to complain against the police, because sometimes they think it's us against them.
Does it start with making sure that there's some sort of parity, that the police department, whether it be Peoria, Bloomington-Normal, Galesburg, name a town, that it be representative of the population? And is that the case in McLean County?
I think that's what the goal is, to try to get more people to come and be a part of the law enforcement community, because when people see individuals that look like them, they feel more comfortable. But if that's not the situation, then they feel reluctant in coming forward because they think that something might happen. So I think that's the goal, that we're trying to get people to feel comfortable in being a part of the law enforcement community in Bloomington-Normal.
John just said something interesting, Mike, that if you as a minority might see someone who looks like you'd be more comfortable. Is that part of the core problem to begin with? Is that I don't care if I look at you or you or you, I should feel the same level of comfort. If it's an Asian, a white person, an African American, Hispanic, is that part of the problem right here to begin with?
Well, you know, it's one of the interesting things when you look at the history of policing in the United States. The stereotype of the Irish beat cop came about because the Irish were the group often being picked on in the 1830s and 1840s, and they learned how to take political power and how to make sure their people were represented on those police departments. So I think that the goal is twofold. One is that citizens feel that any officer is going to treat them fairly, but also that their public officials, their police departments, their fire departments, that reflects the diversity of America. And I think that brings a confidence, because sometimes there's, I think, often a feeling in some people that I won't be understood, but maybe I can get a better rapport if the person maybe looks a little bit more like me. So that's why I think that's an important goal for civic agencies.
I think historically, because of the relationships in the past, you know, if you look back during the Civil Rights era, you look at how the police department dealt with the minority community. And so people still look at that, and they haven't forgotten how they were treated by the police with the dogs and with the reaction to them, the military style. And so there's a reluctance to really trust the police. So the police have to put forth an effort to try to let people know that I'm going to be fair, I'm going to deal with you as a person. Whereas in the minority communities, they don't feel like they're being treated that way. They're not being treated as a citizen the same way as other people are. So that's why they lean toward, if this person looks like me, I think that I can relate to him better.
Is there a different feel amongst young minority residents as opposed to the older minorities?
I think so, because the older minorities, they know what the situation is, and then they have some people because they can talk to them and probably get a better idea, whereas many of the younger people don't feel like they're being understood, and they're being mistreated just because they are younger.
How many minority officers are on the Bloomington Police Department, for instance?
They only have one.
In addition to the police chief?
In addition to the chief, and that person is a detective, so they don't have any on the street.
So it's hard, going back to your point, it's hard to say, you know, yeah, I know that I'm a black and you're a white officer, but there are other blacks on the police force. I still have a comfort, but there isn't that comfort.
Yeah, and that's a challenge, and I think, you know, that's one of those things that everybody says, yes, we want to have more diversity in our police department. I think one of the challenges, and this is where community interaction can be so important, is how do we build an atmosphere where that young person says, I want to be a police officer. You know, this is attractive to me, and something where I feel like I can be proud of it and feel like this is a service not only to the larger community, but to my particular ethnic background too.
So how are we doing overall in the aftermath of New York, Ferguson, et cetera? Obviously, there's a much greater awareness, Jamila, but how are we doing, in particular in Peoria?
I think there is an interest in the citizens here of Peoria to want to address this, want to come out and talk about their levels of interaction with the police, be it positive or negative. And I think that's a first step, the fact that we're having conversations, because prior to Ferguson, there were not conversations. Eric Garner happened a few months before Mike Brown's killing by Darren Wilson, and there wasn't the same type of national conversation. In fact, you've had some organizations like the Malcolm X Grassroots Movement, which is a national group that talks about police brutality. They compiled a list of killings by police and vigilante from 2012 until now that indicated over about 400 people have been killed by police since 2012. And they have since said that every 28 hours, a black person is killed by law enforcement or some form of vigilante. So, you know, when looking at numbers in that context, this is necessary. Conversations are necessary, and I feel Peoria is being open to having those conversations. But of course, after conversation, there must be some form of action.
And that's where I want to go, because conversation is a good start. But what are some of the solutions? What do we need to do to make sure that this just isn't, and let me refer to Terry Renner, the Bloomington mayor. Terry Renner said, I want this to be more than just signing a pledge card for Not in Our Town. I want there to be some substantive action. So where do we go?
Well, I'm also a part of the Bloomington Human Relations Commission that the mayor has established. And that's one charge that he has asked us to try to come up with ideas and go out into the community more to try to get some reaction from people, to get some feedback from the community. What is it that they think? Because it's easy for someone who's sitting back on some commission or somebody who's not involved to say, this is what I think, but what is it that the community thinks should be the solution or a remedy to what's going on? And that's what we're going to be trying to seek information, and we're going to have a program on January 22nd to try to get the community to try to talk and just let us know just what they think.
And we'll mention that January 22nd meeting at the end of the program, so you have a chance to write that down. So let me mention a couple of ideas. Sensitivity training for all officers. Can we effect that?
Well, that sounds good, but I know that sensitivity trainings have been happening since I was in elementary school. So this is not a new conversation about having sensitivity trainings with police. And so I think we might need to engage those conversations. But one of the actions that are very tangible for us to put into place right now is to provide support, financial support, funding from the city and the police department towards the Peoria Community Relations Advisory Committee. At this point, it is a non-funded entity, which means it does not have any type of powers or recommending powers to the police. So they can make as many observations and have as many conversations as they like, but that's not going to translate into actionable changes. So having the mayor and the police chief invest in this committee so that we can go out, collect those complaints, have formal complaints in police officers' files to sort of impact that police officer's income, knowing that if they're going to harass individuals, they will be a formal complaint will be filed against them, and this goes into their record and affects their promotions. So when you begin affecting people's dollars, then you'll see more change. Just having sensitivity training, I know many people who go to a lot of trainings and continue the same behavior afterwards.
But you can't have sensitivity training or body cameras or anything else of that nature if you don't have what Jamila said was funding. So how do you do this?
Well, and again, that's why I think it's an important point she makes, is that this is more than just lip service. And that's where, like, Minority and Police Partnership in Bloomington-Normal is financially supported by the departments and by the cities and the town to try to make sure that dialogue is taking place. And I think that's one of those things, too, where we talk about the police. Police are under a city council, under a mayor, under a city manager. This is not just a police issue. That's where what Mayor Renner did in Bloomington, to make a strong statement and say, hey, as a mayor, this is a priority to me. I think the police, we have to remember, are city employees, and they answer to city administrations. And that's where elected officials, I think, have to step up and not be afraid to ruffle some feathers sometimes and say, look, this can be just as important in a budget as maybe ammunition or other things that are necessarily part of police budgets. We have to make sure we are making not only sound bites in support of this, but that we're also willing to put some resources here.
I'm sorry, you wanted to add to that?
Well, we have been talking over the past couple of years in Bloomington about a citizen review committee, and that's another thing that we wanted to stress too, that you have to give them some power. They have to have subpoena power and different things like that, not just to just look at what they're doing, but they can take some type of action. And I think when you look at the Michael Brown and Eric Garner case, if they don't see anything that comes out of that from the justice system, then they think that the police can do whatever. And I think when you see those types of situations, people don't have trust in the police, and that's nationwide. And so that's the thing about it. We have to make sure that if they're doing some things that's not correct, then there's some punishment that goes along with it.
I'm interested that you mentioned the Citizens Review Board, or whatever title you want to give to it, because the Quality Police Initiative down in St. Louis County, they have 4 different areas that they want to improve for all police departments in that area, including recruitment, training, deployment, and accountability. One of the recommendations, or it's a group of, is training for unarmed combat training, conflict resolution, anti-racism training. Once again, money. Has any group in Peoria discussed this and sought out funding to try to address that issue?
Well, the Community Relations Advisory Committee has reviewed this quality policing initiative, and they actually meet this Thursday evening, I believe 5:30, in room 404 at City Hall.
So for the record, that would already have passed by
okay,
the time
very
this
good,
airs,
sorry.
but at any rate, go ahead, I'm sorry.
But so yes, they are looking into that. And Dr. Rita Ali, who is the chair of the advisory committee, she has indicated that she's in communication with the city and other elected officials to discuss bringing resources to the table to fund this. But I would say not only is there a responsibility on behalf of the elected officials and law enforcement, but there is a responsibility upon the citizen. If and when you are experiencing this level of abuse, aggression by city officials, by police officers, you need to formally put in a complaint. You need to actively participate in this system we call democracy. You cannot continue to sit by and let this happen. So there's an accountability on behalf of the citizen to actively engage their government, actively participate in some of these challenges that we're facing. The reasons law enforcement are able to do what they do because it's under a cloak of anonymity. We don't know. We don't know what's happening. So if people don't say what's going on, we won't know. We cannot address it.
Yeah, and I would add, not only complain, but praise.
Sure.
If there is an officer that's doing a really good job interacting with the community, that has a positive attitude that people are looking up to, let that become a role model. And so we need complaints, we need to register when there are problems, but we also need to speak up when somebody's doing the right thing. Right. And make sure that person doesn't feel isolated and they're recognized for their efforts too.
We started the conversation with a description of Not in Our Town.
Mm-hmm.
Not in Our Town doesn't address just police community issues. What else needs to be addressed in McLean County?
One of the things I like with Not in Our Town is, to me, it's a barometer. And in a sense, we've made a public statement that said we do not want to be a community that discriminates. We want to be a community that embraces diversity. And in a sense, once you proclaim that, you have to live up to it. And so it's not just police-community relationship, it's human relationship, period, through all sectors of the community. And as we've looked at revised some of our artwork and logos, not on my work site, not in my office, not in my beauty salon, not in my bar. In other words, we want to have an attitude where positive human relations are something we look for.
And that starts in schools, actually. It's probably the best place to start that, not in our school.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a part of Not in Our Town, too. That's the education piece, too. They're talking with students, they're going to the schools and talking with them and trying to get that going. So, and same thing with recruiting for law enforcement. You have to start in the schools too, start talking to young people about careers in law enforcement. You can't wait till they get to be seniors or in college or whatever. If you start talking to them at younger ages about being a police officer, that's something too that I've encouraged the Normal Police Department. They're going to start reaching out to one of the high school or one of the individuals there that's very influential with young people to try to get them involved, talking with the fire department and the police department, and just opening the door where they can have dialogue.
You share that sentiment?
Well, yes, I think that's important. It's a both and. It's a collection of actions that we need to take. I think we must also understand that people do have positive relationships with police. Some communities require police in their communities because there's so much violence, there's so much robbery and killings and things of that nature. So I think while we're having conversations about how to build relationships or better relationships with police, we should also be talking about the violence that's in these communities that need to be addressed as well. And I've in my research and in some of my observations, violence is a byproduct of poverty. So these communities that are entrenched with violence are also communities that have high unemployment rate, that have high mass incarceration, people who have been incarcerated. So we have to address all of those. So I agree very much with John and Mike in regards to this is a big picture issue.
We have a couple events we want to mention. January 22nd.
Right, the City of Refuge Church in Bloomington. We're going to be opening up to the community to come and talk with law enforcement about some of their practices and procedures and even concerns that people might have.
That church is located
401 East
Jefferson.
in Jefferson Street.
In Bloomington.
Okay. And a movie is just coming out as this airs tonight on Thursday night.
Yes, so Friday, everywhere, all over the country, Selma, the movie is screening. And it will be screening at 3 theaters here in Peoria at Carmike, Willow Knolls, and Landmark. So we want to get as many people out to
And
see
it'll
this.
be in Bloomington as well?
It will be in Bloomington as well. In fact, they'll have a Thursday evening screening at their theater there.
Okay, great. And we want to say thank you to Jamila Wilson, who is an active citizen, and maybe
Yes.
that's an encouragement for others to become a little bit
Yes.
more involved in the community. To Mike Matejka, many of you know him for his years on the city council, but very involved in Not in Our Town in Bloomington-Normal. And to John Elliott, the second vice president of the NAACP in Bloomington-Normal, and involved with Minority and Police Partnership. Thank you all three for the conversation.
Thank
We
you.
hope you continue the conversation at your kitchen table, living room, wherever you happen to be. We appreciate your watching At Issue, and join us please next week when we have a discussion about giving kids at risk a chance at education. We're going to focus on the importance of math. Join us then.